streaming to YouTube. Oh, there we go. All right, there is Jeffrey again. So we do have quorum again. Hopefully Laura or Marzia will be able to join us so then we can sustain quorum in case one of you drops off. Like I said, my name is Ian Sullivan. I am the committee clerk for this committee. I'd like to kind of get the meeting started by having the committee members introduce themselves one at a time. I'll pick at random from my screen here to have you all introduce yourselves, just so that you can all get to know who's going to be working together on this committee before we move on to the election of officers, and we just lost quorum again.
Moving target, Ian.
It is a moving target. I will first look to Councillor Glenn to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councillor Glenn. I represent Sydenham District. So I'm also sitting on heritage properties. So I'm really glad to see this committee forming, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you on the heritage programming and taking care of our couple of museums. So welcome.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Glenn. Next, I will ask Sherry Dobbs to introduce herself, please.
Hi, I'm Sherry Dobbs, and I don't know what I should say. I'm looking forward to being on this committee. I was a volunteer City Hall tour guide for a number of years, which I enjoyed very much. So, yeah, and I'm keenly interested in the heritage of the city and the many things that I didn't know about City Hall prior to me being a tour guide. I think that there's many people in the city that don't know a lot about City Hall and many of the other opportunities to learn about the city that we live in. So I look forward to being on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Next, I will ask Paul Banfield.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much. Like Sherry, I look forward very much to being on the committee. Prior to this, I was on the Heritage Properties Committee, but felt a little out of my depth on that committee. Windows and doors were not my forte, although I do need to do some work on my own. I come to it more from the archival perspective. I was the university archivist at Queen's for a number of years prior to my retirement. So looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Next, I will ask Jeffrey Allen to introduce himself. And Jeffrey, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, I'm a city guide at the moment with the city. At the moment, I facilitate a writers group at the senior centre. Also, I was involved at the Pump House with the All Aboard event earlier this year. I have been in Toronto for a long time, and I served a lot on the non-profit sector with various agencies in Toronto. And one area that I was interested in my work was restoring heritage railway stations, several heritage railway stations across Ontario. So I'm very pleased to be admitted to your committee. I've never worked on a government committee before, or a city committee, so this will be a new experience. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Next, I'm going to ask Laura Hallman, please.
Hi there, I'm Laura. Like Paul, I come from a more archival perspective. I've worked at the United Church of Canada Archives for about 10 years and in various ways. 2 years ago during the pandemic, and also due to having a toddler in the city, we relocated from Toronto to Kingston. So I now work remotely for the United Church, doing mostly records management and working with digital records. Looking forward to seeing the municipal side of things. I'm very interested in heritage, and I was born and raised in Kingston. So it's nice to come back and be involved in the city.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. Next, I'm going to look to Jean Hero.
Okay, good day to all. I'm sorry I cannot seem to be able to get my camera working, but that's fine. Next time I might be home. The other thing is that I cannot stay with you very long because I actually am on the job. I've been working for 20 years as the board member and curator of the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. I'm an quite avid tool collector, and I also collect scientific instruments, and I do blacksmithing and well, traditional blacksmithing. My trade is that of an environmental engineer. I was a professor at RMC for 30 years. So my experience are varied. I'm very well connected into the antique tool collecting community, and I've been collaborating with several museums through the year. So hopefully, I'm very happy to participate in that committee. I've been, as I said, 20 years into the McLaughlin committee, and I look forward to hopefully contribute to this one. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jean. And last but not least, Marzia Sakidad. I'm going to click ask to unmute, and if you get a notification, Marzia, from either myself or the meeting host to promote you to meeting panelist, please accept it, because right now you're currently actually as an attendee, and so we can't actually turn on your video screen, so that might be a little harder for us to see you, but the floor is yours.
How can I get in?
I am going to try one more. I'm going to promote to panelist and see if you get a notification. And if you do, there you are. So you're going to quickly disappear and then come back. And there you are.
Is that okay now?
Yep. And I'm just asked you to turn on your video as well, just so we can see you.
Hello.
There you are. All right, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello. This is Marzia from Afghanistan. I don't know too much about the city hall. I'm so interested to get into the city hall and get knowledge from you guys. And anything else do I need to say?
That's perfect.
It?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marzia. Okay, so with all that out of the way, I am going to move to the first item of business, which is my only job until we get a chair. So I'm going to look for a person that would like to volunteer as the position of chair. So it's not a massive job. Your job is to just help us run through the agenda, and I'm always here to help. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it this meeting, that's absolutely fine. We can always come back to that as well. We do need a chair or vice chair, however, to get the meeting started. Councillor Glenn.
Unless someone else wants to, I will volunteer so we can at least hold our meeting and get things rolling. But if anyone else is amenable and would like to chair, it's a great opportunity. And there's lots of support. Ian is an excellent clerk, and as I like to put it, he helps put the training wheels on the agenda if you want to get an opportunity to chair. So I'm going to sort of put that out there, but if no one is comfortable right now, I will certainly do that, and then we'll, I guess, move to a vice chair. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm forward if no one else would like to.
Are there any other volunteers for the position of chair? Seeing none, I will, however, need a mover and seconder to have Councillor Glenn moved by Cherry and seconded by Paul. All those in favor of Councillor Glenn being chair, all raise your hands or virtual hands in Zoom, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And that is carried. All right, is there a nominee for the position or a volunteer for the position of vice chair? So vice chair is just in case Councillor Glenn isn't able to make it to the meeting, you would run the meeting in her stead. I'm of course just as available to help a vice chair, and it's also a really good learning opportunity as well, as Councillor Glenn has said. Sherry, you would like to nominate yourself, or you're just on mute? Sorry, so I just want to make sure I got what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's actually Sherry. And
yeah,
yes,
sorry.
Here.
Sherry for vice chair. Are there any other nominees for vice chair? I am not hearing or seeing any, so I will just need a mover and seconder for her as vice chair. Moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Paul Banfield. All those in favor, please raise your hands or say aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. And with all of that out of the way, I am happy to turn it over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you as always, Ian. And thank you, Sherry, for agreeing to be vice chair. Much appreciated. Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting to order then. And then our first step in business is approval of the agenda. So could I have somebody move to approve the agenda, please? Sherry, and seconded by Paul. All in favor? So show of hands or say aye. All right, that's
Aye.
carried then, Ian. Okay, we have no minutes to confirm. Does anybody have a disclosure of pecuniary interest to make? Okay, and I see none. So we're moving right along here. So I see nothing under number 6, Ian, correct?
You're correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, good. And so we're into briefings. So I'm going to pass this over to Kevin Gibbs, who's with us, to give us a briefing. And Kevin, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So what I'm going to be doing right now is giving a fairly high-level overview and orientation to the Heritage Programs Committee. Talking a little bit about the museum spaces that Heritage Services works in and a few other things as well. So next slide, please. And we can actually move to the next slide, please. So as a bit of an outline here, just to give you a sense of what I'll be talking about over the next few minutes. I'll talk a little bit about the Heritage Services Department. Many of the reports that come to this committee will be coming from staff from the Heritage Services Department, although we work closely with many other departments as well. I'll say a few comments on the mandate of the committee, and I'm sure many of the people in the meeting today will be familiar with these. I'll talk a little bit about the city museums and Kingston City Hall National Historic Site, acknowledging that there are some people in the meeting who are very closely connected with those sites and have a lot of information and ideas that can be brought forth concerning those sites that we work out of. And I'll talk a little bit about heritage programming, or our plans for heritage programming in 2023. Some of these things that I'll be talking about have already started. A couple of are already complete. But certainly we have a lot of opportunity to get insight from the committee on how our programming can be improved for 2023, and then certainly looking forward into 2024 and beyond. I'll talk a little bit about that, and there'll be many opportunities for committee involvement there as well. I'll briefly mention the City of Kingston Heritage Fund, and then I'll pass it over to Melanie Banks, who is on the call, who will talk a little bit about the civic collection and the commemorations policy for the City of Kingston. Historically, committees have been very involved in providing input on objects that should be accessioned into the civic collection. And I see that would be a great opportunity for this committee as well as things that need to be commemorated within the city, people, events, and those sorts of things. So next slide, please. So I'll talk now a little bit about the Heritage Services Department, again, because many of the reports coming to this committee will be coming from Heritage Services staff. I haven't put any names against these positions that you see on the screen here. And the reason for that is that the department is in a bit of a state of flux. We have a number of people who are on leave, a number of people who are backfilling for other people, for those people who are on leave, and some temporary staff as well. But I'm certainly happy to talk about, specific names that go beside any of these positions that you see on the screen. So there's a director of Heritage Services. For now, I am the acting director of Heritage Services, but some of you may know Jen Campbell, who is currently filling another position in the corporation of the city of Kingston. So I'll be temporarily in the position of director, but typically I am in the manager of heritage programming position. So we have two sides to the department, the heritage programming side and the heritage planning side. Typically, the heritage planning staff bring reports to the heritage properties committee, so I won't say too much about them today. Apart from the fact that we have a new manager of heritage planning, started a couple of weeks ago, named Joel Conrad, who some of you may have met. But then on the heritage programming side, the side that will more likely bring reports to this committee, we have a small curatorial team, typically of 2 people. We have a programming team, and in this sense, I mean programming, bringing or developing and offering educational programs to many different communities. And we have the supervisor, museum operations and collections, Melanie Banks, who was on the meeting today, who supervises the civic collection technician, as well as a pair of museum assistants. In the summer months, we have many different students who help operate the museums and help work with the collections. So they started this week. We have 9 summer students. And we also occasionally have interns, work study students, placement students from the education department at Queen's, and other positions as well. So next slide, please. So what do we do in Heritage Services? Well, we talk about, or we deal with, topics of cultural heritage in the broadest sense. So a bit of a dictionary definition on the screen here, what cultural heritage is. So we're talking about the legacy of physical artifacts as well as intangible attributes of a group or society that's inherited from past generations. And I do see a hand up on the screen, Jean Haro.
Yeah, I apologize, but since my break is over, I have to go back to work. I thank you very much. Look forward to work with all of you. It should be fun. I look forward to the minutes of that meeting. And I promise that next time I'm with the group, I will have a camera running. Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much, Jean.
day.
We look forward to having you and your experience here around the table. Till next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. I can resume if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So we'll be talking about cultural heritage a lot, and that includes tangible heritage, so those sorts of things that you can touch, pick up, or move into if we're talking about buildings. But we also talk a lot, or deal a lot in the Heritage Services Department with intangible culture. So things like traditions, stories, histories, music, cuisine, the sorts of things that you can't pick up, that you can't touch, but are so important for culture in many different ways. And we also talk about natural heritage, or deal with natural heritage. Certainly the natural world provided a backdrop for the things that people did in the past and that people do today. But we also like to think about nature for its own sake, and what sorts of things that we can learn from dealing with the natural heritage of the Kingston area. And so you can see on the screen the 3 different facets of cultural heritage, the tangible, intangible, and natural, that we like to think about and deal with in Heritage Services. So next screen, please. So I'll say just a couple of things about the mandate of the Heritage Programs Committee, and this is taken from the report to council that brought this committee together. So the committee has the opportunity to address the issues, opportunities, and projects related to Kingston's cultural heritage, including responsible stewardship of associated cultural heritage resources. So these could be tangible heritage or intangible heritage, or in some cases, natural heritage as well. To apply knowledge and expertise on the programming and operations of the city museums, Kingston City Hall National Historic Site, civic artifact collection, and community cultural heritage education. So for that last bullet point, what I'm talking about here will be, opportunities or events that perhaps take place not within the museums or National Historic Site, but are fundamentally important to the cultural heritage of the city of Kingston. And also to provide advisory and consultative support to cultural heritage initiatives, including educational opportunities. So I'll talk about some of these things in terms of the plans that we have for 2023 and in some cases beyond in a moment. But next slide, please. So I'll briefly introduce the City Museums and City Hall National Historic Site for anybody who's in the meeting who is maybe not familiar with these places. I know some people are very familiar with at least some of the places, but the two city museums are the Pump House Steam Museum. We typically stylize that to a single word, Pump House with a capital P and a capital H. The McLaughlin Woodworking Museum is the other city museum. And then we have City Hall National Historic Site. And within City Hall, there are many different facets to the building, but in the back of the building, in the market wing of the building, there is a dedicated gallery space, which sort of stands alone as its own kind of gallery that can be programmed in many different ways. We refer to that as a market wing cultural space. Next slide, please. I will point out there are a couple of policies and plans related to the sorts of things that may be of interest to this committee. There is a committee bylaw, which I won't get into, but Ian would be able to answer any questions about the committee bylaw. There was a Kingston Culture Plan that was put together about 13 years ago, which talks a lot about heritage. It also talks about art and culture. So it's a document that kind of combines the two, but touches on many of the different things that, that we think about from a heritage perspective. So just to have those as reference documents that people may be interested in. Next slide, please. And there are policies related to most of these spaces that we operate out of, in addition to a policy for the civic collection and a policy for cultural community engagement and education as well. And these can be consulted if anybody wishes to do so. And they're all kind of grouped together under an overview policy as well. So they can be found on the City of Kingston website, downloaded and consulted if anyone has a desire to do so. Next slide, please. But let's get into the different museum spaces and cultural spaces that we work out of. We have the Pump House Museum, which is the original water pumping station for the city of Kingston. It pumped water out of Lake Ontario and then distributed that throughout the city of Kingston, or at least to many parts of the city of Kingston in the 19th century. A couple of images of the pump house on the screen and a map showing you where it's located at the southwest end of Ontario Street, about a 10-minute walk from City Hall. Next slide, please. Within the Pump House Museum, we have multiple spaces. You can go in and see the original pumps, or two of the pumps from the 19th century that pumped water throughout the city of Kingston. We also have a room that is filled with model trains, very popular with the younger crowd, as well as people of all ages. And we have a dedicated group of volunteers that work to bring or to keep that train room up to speed, so to speak. We have a room that we refer to as the Discovery Center that's full of activities, primarily for children, but really of interest to anybody who would want to use it. It's an open space that can be put together in different sorts of ways, depending on the sorts of programs that are being offered on a particular day. Then we also have a larger gallery space that has rotating exhibits. And I'll talk about the 3 different exhibits that are in that space or plan to be in that space for 2023. But you can see an image on the right side of the screen of the current exhibit that is in that gallery space. Next slide, please. The second museum that's run by the City of Kingston is the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. There's a little map there showing where it is in the rural part of Kingston towards the eastern part of the city. And unfortunately, that map is covering part of the image on the screen, but the museum itself consists of 2 different buildings, mid-19th century log cabin that you can see on the screen, as well as a more modern building that includes some workshop space, so we can have activities going on there of various sorts. Next slide, please. And the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum has, for the last couple of years, been a dedicated programming space. So it's no longer open as a typical drop-in sort of museum. There are a couple of exhibits that are still on display, being held over from when the museum was open as a more traditional sort of museum space. But the way it's used now is really for offering programs and workshops that people can sign up to and participate in throughout the year. So if anyone were to drop by, most of the days the door will be locked, but you can sign up for programs, including things like learning how to make a canoe paddle, or children may learn how to make a jigsaw puzzle. And we also have a very popular December activity called Winter Light, where the museum is open up to the public and people can come in and do lots of arts and crafts activities. You can also see on the screen one of the collections that we have at the McLaughlin, which is made up of a very large collection of wood planes, and you can see some of those on the screen. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have City Hall National Historic Site. We have a couple of tour guides or former tour guides in the meeting today, which is fantastic. In the summer, we offer guided tours of the building from the basement up into the clock tower. For the rest of the year, we have opportunities for people to come in and see at least the first and second floor of City Hall in a self-guided format. We think it's really important to have the building open to get people to see this fantastic National Historic Site. Next slide, please. And then we also have a couple of opportunities within the building for more dedicated exhibition spaces. Throughout the first and second floors of the building, there are some small, what we refer to as niche cases, and you can see an example there on the right of the screen. And these are small standalone exhibit spaces where we typically collaborate with community partners to bring together some content for these. And they'll tell a simple story, sometimes a complex story told in a simple way because of the size of the space that we're dealing with here. But they're a really great opportunity to have stories being brought in from the community and being exposed to the many number of people that come through City Hall over the course of the year. They typically go up in the spring, stay up for about a year, and then come down again. So they're temporary exhibits. And then we have the Market Wing Cultural Space, which is a larger space where different sorts of rotating exhibits can be brought in. And you can see a couple of images there on the left side of the screen. The one in the center is the exhibit that was recently taken down, which was all about the history of Ontario Street. And it's now a vacant space. We took that exhibit out recently, and we're planning on installing another one, which I'll talk about in a moment. But you can get a sense of the size of the Market Wing Cultural Space from that image on the left side. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk a little bit about heritage programming, the sorts of programs and events that we'll be bringing together for 2023 and beyond. But I'll point out a couple of different things that really ground all of the different sort of work that we're interested in doing. And one is providing engaging learning opportunities for a broad swath of the population of Kingston, all ages and all different sorts of interests and backgrounds as well. And telling diverse stories is really important as well. There was a couple of different programs and projects that inform the sort of work that we do, bringing together educational opportunities. The Your Stories, Our Histories project was a public outreach project that asked people about the sorts of things that would be interesting to hear in the sorts of programs that the City of Kingston provides. And one of the things that came out of that project was the importance of telling diverse stories. And those niche cases that I just talked about, having those community collaboration projects, is really an outcome of the Your Stories, Our Histories project. To be able to bring community stories that are very diverse and have them displayed throughout City Hall is something that's a great outcome of that. And I'll also mention the Engage for Change project, which was really about bringing forward the importance of understanding Indigenous culture and history. That project has really come to an end recently, but it's being reformatted or rebranded as Indigenous Initiative. So this encompasses all of those sorts of opportunities and programs that relate to Indigenous culture, Indigenous history, and the Indigenous community of Kingston. You can see the logo for the Engage for Change, which will be held over for the Indigenous initiatives and branding as well. And this is something that continues to be fundamentally important for the work that's being done, not just in heritage services, but throughout the City of Kingston. Next slide, please. So just a couple of points about the sorts of things that we're planning on doing for 2023 in the museum spaces. So I'll talk a little bit about the exhibition space at the Pump House. So if you remember a couple of minutes ago, I talked about that space within the Pump House where we have rotating exhibits. The current exhibit that's in there is called On the Move, 400 Years of Transportation in Kingston, which is all about the history of transportation and its many modes in Kingston. This was brought in last year to correspond with the opening of the Waubin Crossing, formerly the third crossing. And that's being held over until June of this year. After which we'll bring in an art exhibit called The Art of Survival. So we worked in collaboration with the Prison for Women Collective to bring together a collection of artworks that were made by women while they were incarcerated or after they were incarcerated. So a very interesting exhibit, and we'll have some public events associated with that as well. So for opportunity for people to come in and participate. That'll be up for the summer months. And then in the fall of 2023, we'll have an exhibit on the Civic Collection, or at least bringing in interesting items from the Civic Collection. One of the fantastic things that we have here in the museum spaces of the city of Kingston is a tremendous array of objects and artifacts that oftentimes don't get put on display. They're held in storage, but this is going to be an opportunity to bring some of those interesting objects out for people to come in and get a sense of the breadth of objects that are in the Civic Collection of the city of Kingston. Next slide, please. Now in City Hall for 2023, in the niche cases that I talked about, we've already changed them over for the 2023 season. So we have a couple of different things up. We have one called Enduring Roots, commemorating Kingston's Ukrainian community, which was actually put in a couple of years ago, but we decided to hold that over so people can get an opportunity to continue to see that small exhibit. We worked in collaboration with a group from Queen's University, a group of students and faculty from the Classics Department and the Conservation Program, to bring together an exhibit called Antiquities Through Modern Eyes, which talks about the sort of work that gets done to conserve objects and how archaeologists and conservators and other scientists and interested individuals can come together and work on objects. And this is something that is focused on classical antiquities, but there is some crossover with the sort of work that gets done with objects from Kingston and the Kingston area as well. And then the last exhibit that we put in for 2023 in the niche cases is called Strayed, Kingston's Wandering Cows. So it's a very interesting exhibit on the history of large livestock in Kingston. So there's been quite a lot of interest there. And the woman who we collaborated with to put that exhibit together was recently interviewed a couple of times on the CBC. And then in the Market Wing cultural space, we're going to be bringing in a sort of interesting interactive art exhibit called 36 Questions That Lead to Loving Kingston. And in this case, we're collaborating closely with the Arts and Culture Department at the city. And it's all about getting people to think about why Kingston is an interesting place through hands-on activities and some art displays as well. So that'll be coming into the Market Wing cultural space towards the end of May or into the early part of June. Next slide, please. I will point out that I don't have a slide here for exhibits at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum because, again, that space is closed from a traditionally museum sort of perspective, and it'll be open only for educational programs and other sorts of workshop opportunities. But speaking about educational programs and workshop opportunities, I'll mention some of the ones that we have lined up for 2023. This isn't all of them, but it has, it's a fairly comprehensive list. We regularly offer programs for school groups across the 3 sites. So in this case, the McLaughlin is open for school programs if there are interested schools to participate there. But not just school groups. We also work with other sorts of groups and individuals as well, including things like the Girl Guides. We often have come in to participate in programs. At the Pump House, we have other sorts of programs as well. We have a regular and long-lasting series called Trains and Tots, which brings younger kids in to get an opportunity to play and look at the trains in the train room. But there's also an educational component there as well. Each week, there's a different topic that the toddlers and younger children will be engaged with. It could be something along the lines of Indigenous culture or dance, movement, music. Each week it changes, and it's a very popular program. We recently had an after-hours program for the 19+ crowd called Beer and Bacteria, which combined interest in beer and brewing with the history of those topics within Kingston, and thinking about how bacteria in the water led to kind of an influx or an increase in the number of beer production facilities within Kingston in the 19th century to deal with contaminated water. And then in December, we also have a long-standing tradition of hosting an event called All Aboard for the Holidays, where the space is opened up, decorated in a very sort of cheerful and traditional December sort of way, where our families and other groups can come in and see the museum in a different light. Within City Hall, I mentioned the guided and self-guided tours that we offer have typically been very popular. And we recently started or restarted a noon-hour lecture series on a bi-monthly basis, which is now being called Heritage Hour. It used to be called the Heritage Resource Center, or HRC lecture series. But we're trying to broaden the scope of that activity a little bit. So we've rebranded it as Heritage Hour. So people will be, every time a Heritage Hour is held, there will be somebody who will be speaking about a topic, or in some cases, perhaps leading a workshop component to it as well, something to do with the history of Kingston, but in its broadest sense, or the heritage of Kingston in the broadest sense. And then at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, we continue to hold workshops. And these could, again, be things like learning how to make a paddle for a canoe, or making a charcuterie board. We have some that are geared towards children and younger audiences, including making a wooden sword and shield. And then we have that Winterlight December activity that I talked about already. Next slide, please. One of the things that is very important for the sort of work that we do is trying to bring heritage and heritage themes to the city beyond the sort of traditional spaces where heritage in the past has been focused. So moving beyond the museum spaces, beyond City Hall, and really beyond the downtown core of Kingston. So a great part of doing this work is collaborating with community groups and making connections with various communities within the city of Kingston. And I'll mention a couple of them here. This is by no means an exhaustive list. We're always looking to expand the sorts of collaborations that we can offer and that we can contribute to. But we've done and continue to do quite a bit of work with the Indigenous community, building on that Engage for Change Indigenous Initiatives program. And just a couple that we can mention here include the Water Walk, Sacred Fires that are held on a monthly basis across from City Hall. We have a service level agreement. The City of Kingston has a service level agreement with the Kingston Indigenous Languages Nest. We participate in supporting National Indigenous Peoples Day, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and other Indigenous-led events as well. We also have a service level agreement with the Kingston and Area Association of Museums, Art Galleries, and Historic Sites. And one of the things that they'll be doing for 2023 is coordinating the Doors Open event. So various spaces within the city of Kingston will be open to the public, in some cases, spaces that are not traditionally open to the public. So that's a very exciting and popular event. And then we also have connections with different sorts of community organizations that sort of happen on a case-by-case basis. And I'll just mention a couple here. Science Rendezvous, which will be held at the Leon Center next month. The Juvenis Festival, which I believe is going on this Saturday. And then Beyond Classrooms Kingston, where school classes, a group of students will come together and then spend an entire week either at City Hall or at the Pump House. So the curriculum for their week is really focused on the sorts of opportunities that can be provided by moving into a different space and engaging with different staff from the city of Kingston. And we've hosted classes in both the City Hall and the Pump House. Next slide, please. And again, I'll point out the importance of diversifying stories when it comes to heritage and the work that Heritage Services and other departments of the city of Kingston do. So some of the plans that we have moving forward at City Hall include bringing an Indigenous lens to some of the spaces within City Hall. So in the Market Wing cultural space, part of it will continue to be a space for temporary exhibits, but we're planning on putting in a more permanent space that will be focused on Indigenous culture and history. And then one of the temporary exhibits that we'll be putting together in 2024, 2025 will be focused on Black history in Kingston. So that's a very exciting event as well. In the niche cases that we see in City Hall, we continue to have those being driven by community collaborations. So in 2024, we're planning on putting an Islamic culture niche case in City Hall. We also have plans to put in an LGBTQT plus 2S a niche case as well. And we'll continue to work with community partners to fill the other niche cases that we have in 2024 and moving forward. We'll also be doing some work renovating the Sir John A. Macdonald room to retell that story in a different way through a different lens. We plan on changing some of the art within City Hall by taking down some of the substantial mayoral portraits that you see that are so prominent within the space, and perhaps bringing in some Indigenous art, perhaps into council chambers. And we're working on renaming a meeting room that's to mark the importance of Indigenous naming within the space as well. At the Pump House, I already talked about the Art of Survival Prison for Women collective exhibit that will be coming in a couple of months' time. And then thinking about the broader community, one of the things that we're working on now is providing different sorts of walking tours and bike tours and trying to move those beyond the downtown core. One of the areas of Kingston that we're really trying to focus on is bringing heritage opportunities and events to the rural parts of Kingston, but also other parts of urban Kingston as well, Swampward, for example. And we'll continue with the Indigenous initiatives that I've already talked about. And one other thing that I'll mention here under the heading of community, we also have a community within the corporation of the City of Kingston. And we've been developing an e-learning opportunity. So this will be rolled out to staff across the corporation of the City of Kingston, and perhaps other parties who may have interest in this, which is all about Indigenous cultural awareness. So we've spent a lot of our time focusing on providing educational opportunities for the community, but it's also very important to provide educational opportunities for staff and other people connected to the City of Kingston. So next slide, please. One of the things that the City of Kingston does is support other local museums. There are many, many museums within Kingston, so we have a role in providing support to those. So the City of Kingston Heritage Fund provides an amount of money to different museums and galleries and other organizations that have a heritage connection. And this is facilitated by the Kingston and Area Association of Museums, Art Galleries, and Historic Spaces, CAM, as part of that service level agreement that I've talked about. So they administer the City of Kingston Heritage Fund. They're responsible for bringing together a group of peers who will comment and provide input on all the different applications that come into the Heritage Fund, and then deal with the logistics of dispersing those funds to the successful applicants to the fund. We have a couple of different streams of grant funding within the City of Kingston Heritage Fund. Some of them are strictly for operating costs for the museums that exist in Kingston, so they can keep their doors open or help to keep their doors open by providing funds for staffing, by providing funds for collections work. But we also provide grants that are specific to defined projects. A museum or a community organization or a gallery may have some small project or a medium-sized project that they want to complete, so they can get funding from the Heritage Fund to do that as well. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to, or would like to pass it over to Melanie Banks, who can talk about the Civic Collection and the importance of the Civic Collection and what comprises the Civic Collection, and then the commemorations policy of the City of Kingston as well.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Just before you begin, Melanie, I just want to congratulate you, Kevin, and thank you for stepping up into the role of Director of Heritage. It's a pleasure to have you in that role. So sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Melanie, but by all means, now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kevin. So like Kevin said, hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Banks. I'm the Supervisor of Museum Operations and Collections with the City. Much of my work with this committee is going to be around the collections management policy, so new acquisitions to the collection, as well as any deaccessions, and the commemorations policy, which I'm all going to review right now. So the purpose of the collections management policy is to promote public understanding of the history and culture of the City of Kingston, municipal government, and more generally, the tangible and intangible heritage of Kingston community's culture, standards, and values. There are 4 categories that we classify objects into. There's the primary collection, the secondary, the working collection, general heritage assets. I'm going to discuss them in more detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. The primary collection consists of accessioned and cataloged objects that are of the highest level of historic value. They have a direct connection to a museum, collection, or site. An example of the primary collection would be some of the mayoral portraits that you see throughout City Hall. Next slide, please. The next collection is the secondary collection. It consists of accessioned and cataloged objects with historic value, but they may not directly relate to a site or museum or collection. An example of this would be the wood plane collection that is housed at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. Next slide, please. The last two categories do not have accessioned or cataloged objects are deemed consumable assets. The working collection is reserved for objects used exclusively for educational and interpretive purposes. An example of this would be some of the 19th century tools that the educational programming team uses in workshops and training, such as the wooden drill pictured on this slide. Next slide, please. The last category is general heritage assets. This category is reserved for objects that support the operations of a site. An example of this would be a selection of the furniture that you see throughout City Hall. These objects are also deemed consumable assets. Next slide, please. Moving on to accessions and deaccessions. City Council and mandated staff are dedicated to the principle that all collecting be done according to the highest standards of ethical and professional practice, especially with respect to the laws and regulations, standards, guidelines, and code of ethics listed in the Civic Collection Management Policy. Heritage Services staff review all proposed donations to the Civic Collection under the relevant mandate prior to bringing the recommendations forward to this committee in its advisory capacity to the City Council for consideration. City Council does have final authority to approve all acquisitions to and deaccessions from the Civic Collection. The exception to this would be items proposed as additions to the public art collection, which will be considered by the public art coordinator and the public art working group with input from the manager of heritage, the curators, and the Civic Collection technician before recommending to council. So accessioning is the act of recording a new object into the collection. The city will only accept objects for which we have sufficient resources to care for this object. This includes human, financial, and material resources. Objects recommended to the collection are assessed by staff using a weighted criteria system. Criteria includes not already duplicating the collection, relevance to the collection mandate, and current collection development plans, physical condition, and storage requirements. This process applies a quantitative and objective scoring system to each object offered. Care, conservation, and preservation and storage are all considerations that staff take into account before accessioning an object into the collection. Deaccessioning is the formal and official removal of an object from a collection. When an object does not comply with the criteria for approval of acquisition, it may be proposed for deaccessioning. Once again, a quantitative and objective weighted criteria system is applied to each object that is being considered. As a side note, many of the objects in the Civic Collection currently were brought in during a time when there was no professional museum staff or museum advisory committees. When no professional museum staff or museum advisory committees had professional oversight. It's likely many of these objects in the collection wouldn't meet the collection standards that are now in place. And the staff are committed to a systematic reassessment of these objects to ensure they meet collection criteria and are appropriately categorized within the collection. For example, some of the objects could be damaged or deteriorated significantly without resources to conserve past the object's life cycle. In the event of a deaccession, all reasonable effort is made to keep the objects within the public domain, respect the donor's wishes, and notify all artists. I will be submitting reports for both the acquisition and deaccessions process through this committee. Next slide, please. Moving on to the commemorations policy. The next section I will review is the commemorations strategy and the policy. The purpose of the Kingston commemoration strategy is to establish clear, consistent, and consolidated protocols and decision-making processes as effective means to work with and respond to local community members with the intent of fostering a multifaceted dialogue on people, places, events, and ideas with significance to Kingston's heritage through commemorative forms. This includes to introduce a cohesive overall vision, to outline a transparent, streamlined decision-making framework for commemoration proposals, to clarify the roles and responsibilities for the management of collections, and to respond to the community. Next slide, please. The commemorations are classified into 3 categories. The first category, category A, is a straightforward process with low resource usage and shorter approval times. Examples from this category include civic awards, tree and bench dedications, council motions such as congratulations, recognition, sympathy, and condolences, the mayoral portrait collection that I previously mentioned in City Hall, as well as third-party displays and exhibitions on city property. Next slide, please. The next category, category B, requires a medium amount of processing time and resources. This category includes displays and exhibitions in partnership with the city on city property, such as banners and transit ads, tours, festivals and ceremonies, proclamations, flag raisings, heritage property markers and roadside signs, and external illumination of City Hall or Springer Market Square. Next slide, please. The third and final category is the most involved process requiring more time and resources. This includes the naming of corporate assets, Kingston remembers plaques, civic addressing or street naming, additions and renovations of existing physical commemoration, and city-led one-time events, festivals, and ceremony. Annually, I'll be bringing forward an informal report to the committee and informational report to the committee at the end of year to report on the year's commemorations from all categories. Next slide, please. Oh, I think that's the end, actually. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie and Kevin. That was very informative. I'm just wondering, could we possibly get a copy of the slides? I know that even from my perspective, there's a lot of information there, and I think that would be extraordinarily helpful. Okay, super. Thank you very much, Ian. So with that, I'm noting that we're moving into part 8 of the agenda, which is the business portion. And so we've just had the Kingston Heritage Programs Committee orientation, but this is an opportunity, and I'm sure that Mr. Sullivan will correct me if I'm wrong, for the committee to ask some questions if they do have questions. Perfect. Okay. And 5 minutes, right, Ian? Okay, excellent. So any questions, and you have 5 minutes. Okay, so Sherry?
Is there an opportunity for this committee to perhaps recommend things that they would see as falling into the category of heritage programming?
Kevin?
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. Absolutely, yes. You know, part of the mandate for the committee is to bring the extensive experience and understanding of heritage topics that this committee has to make recommendations or bring different sorts of ideas to light that staff can then consider in terms of when bringing together plans for programming. I will say that we typically do, when it comes to exhibitions, at least the larger exhibitions, plan multiple years out. So we're thinking about the sorts of things that we'll be bringing in 2024, 2025, and even beyond. But there are many opportunities for input from the committee to inform on those broader plans as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Sherry?
No, I had a couple of ideas, and they just, when you were going through everything, they kind of popped up in my head, and I was hoping there'd be an opportunity to bring those forward at some point.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that can happen then. Okay, any further questions? Jeffrey? Jeffrey, can you just unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Okay. Well, it's just that it's more a statement, the fact that I was quite excited in a way to see that we've got Jane's Walks on, and that the pump house is involved in Jane's Walks, and later in May, doing the walk up and down Ontario Street. But I see that they're doing historic walks around Kingston, several around Sydenham and around the Inner Harbour, and I wondered, would the city be interested in sort of extending those walks throughout the summer for tourists. In other words, walks around the city, exploring the history.
Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. So we participate in Jane's Walks on the weekend of Jane's Walks, a very popular tradition that one of the curators from the Pump House will be continuing for this year, the walk up and down Ontario Street. In the past year, we've had some walking opportunities or guided guided walking opportunities, as well as guided bicycling opportunities. And we're continuing those in different formats for 2023 and probably for beyond to make them a little bit more accessible. So in 2022, we had a couple of bicycle tours that people could participate in, where they would bike around with a guide on a bicycle to look at some of the historic parts of Kingston. What we'll be doing for 2023 is offering some of those same bicycle tours, but providing people the opportunity to download the schedule and the route map. So if someone perhaps didn't have the ability or the interest to use a bicycle or even to walk, that they could do it in their own format. We also are putting together some other walking tours around City of Kingston with a commitment to bringing people beyond the downtown core as well. For a number of years, there has been an app that you could download for your smartphone that has a map of various routes around the city focused on heritage aspects. That has become a little bit cumbersome and a little bit hard to maintain. So we will be providing other sorts of opportunities. Probably in paper format. So if people come by City Hall during the summer, they may be able to pick up a map of different sorts of routes of historic and heritage and spots of heritage interest, but also probably having a digital format as well to make it as accessible as possible.
Just a quick, could I have a supplementary, just short
Absolutely, go ahead, Jeffrey. You still have time left.
At the senior centre, at the moment, there's a lecturer there, a mate named David Moore, that gave Exploring Go to Kingston, and he had a lot of information and a lot of presentations on the Indigenous background. And I wondered if you're going to get somebody like him in one of these heritage talks.
Kevin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're putting together our finalized list of heritage talks from City Hall. The next one will be focused on, the plan is to have it focused on Indigenous culture and history. And we'll have another one that's kind of a workshop format where there'll be an opportunity for people to work with or to participate in Indigenous beading activity. But our interest in these Heritage Hour talks is to have a wide breadth of topics that really encompass the breadth of heritage diversity of the City of Kingston.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. Anything else, Jeffrey? Okay. All right. Does anyone else on the committee have any more questions? Okay, Sherry's got one more, so I'll entertain that for now.
Sorry about that. I was just wondering if anyone from your department ever takes the trolley tour around the city, just to ensure that the information that they're providing is accurate. Just wondering.
Kevin?
Thank you. That's a really interesting idea. I haven't personally done it myself, but if there is the possibility that information may not be accurate, it would be interesting to make sure that is the case. I think certainly we could encourage somebody to do that. And my understanding is that for 2023, there will be a trolley stop outside of the Pump House, so there'll be a lot of opportunity for people to come to the Pump House through that means as well.
Perhaps that's something we can discuss is having committee members maybe participate in tours just to get a feel for it and make sure that they're familiar with what the tours are actually like. So that's something we can certainly discuss. I know with Heritage Properties, we get the opportunity to go to properties. So maybe that's something we can discuss, that maybe the committee members could participate in a tour. So we'll talk about that a bit more if committee's interested. So Kevin, sorry, Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
I-
Sorry,
I-
it's
No, that's all
hard
right.
to see. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
no.
look at two monitors, so thanks.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. First of all, yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea that Sherry has. I think it's certainly worth following up on the tours just to make sure that the city is providing accurate information to all of the various sites they're passing. And we did one a number of years ago using at Queens at the archives, using the trolley to go and look at various ethnic areas of Kingston, and the trolleys are really good. Yeah, it really works well. And actually, following up on Jeffrey, in fact, Jeffrey took the question right out of my mind. You must be a mind reader, Jeffrey, when you're not working on so many other things. And that was Kevin. What I was going to ask Kevin is if you could expand a bit on the heritage hours as to where are you coming up with the ideas? You've more or less answered that yes, you do have a list, but what is sort of the a little more, if I got time, a little more detail around what constitutes the hour, where you're coming from?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the Heritage Hour talks that we have are being held every second month, although we have some flexibility there. We hold them in Memorial Hall in City Hall, so we have easy access to the space, which is nice. And we're supported by the IS&T department and the communications department to bring them together. So we have all the resources to actually host the talks. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the actual scheduling, we have one of our program coordinators, so part of the Heritage programming team, who's been working on putting a list together. And this really involves reaching out to different community groups or individuals within the community to focus on different sorts of stories or different sorts of themes that we think represent the diversity of Kingston. So in some ways, it's been shaped by availability of speakers. Right. And for 2023, we have most of our slots taken care of. I think there's one or two left. So there may be some opportunities to bring some additional people in, especially in the later part of the year. But certainly looking forward to 2024 and beyond. We're hoping to continue the Heritage Hour series of speakers. So it'd be of great interest to get a broader list of people who may be interested in leading one of these Heritage Hour talks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions, Paul?
No, not at this time. There might be one a little later, but no, not
okay,
right now.
That's fair. All right. Do any of the other members of the committee who have yet to ask questions have any? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any. So we're going to move on to part B of our business. And this is the 2022 Civic Museum's year-end report. So are we gonna have a member of staff speak to it briefly? Melanie, thank you. Go ahead. I think you just need to unmute. There we go.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I was on mute. So hello again, everyone. I'm going to briefly go over the information report HPC 23-002 and the accompanying appendix, which is the Civic Museum's year-end report for 2022. The purpose of the Civic Museum's year-end report is to present a comprehensive overview of the activities of the Heritage Programming Team, specifically as it relates to the curation of the Civic Artifact Collection, public and museum-based programming, exhibitions, and operations specific to the two city-owned museums, which Kevin ran through before, the Pump House Museum and the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, as well as City Hall National Historic Site. In 2022, the operations of the city museums and heritage sites were able to return to near normal operations after the closures of the public health orders of COVID-19 pandemic impacts from the previous years. The McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, as previously mentioned, reopened for community programming from May to December, while the Pump House was reopened fully at the end of April, providing tours and full access to the site again. City Hall was also able to restart for guided tours from June to October. Next slide, please. I pulled a selection of the graphs that were presented in the report just to briefly go over. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is total attendance numbers of City of Kingston heritage sites from 2018 to 2022. Based on the numbers, you can see a large dip in attendance across the board by site during the height of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. In 2022, while we were able to return to near normal operations prior to the pandemic, numbers at the pump house were still still lower pre-pandemic. So 1,550 in 2021 compared to 7,876 in 2022. So there was a bit of a closing of the gap in attendance to pre-pandemic numbers. While the McLaughlin continues to be run as a programming site instead of a traditional museum, that can account for the change in numbers prior to 2020. City Hall numbers continue to grow, but remain lower than the pre-pandemic levels as well. Next slide, please. The next chart depicts total revenue, excluding grant funding across the programs. Similar to the previous chart, while numbers are not back to pre-pandemic levels, there continues to be a growth as people become more comfortable being in public spaces again. Next slide, please. Finally, the next couple slides I'm going to go through are just going to go over some of the highlights of the work completed by the Heritage Programming team in 2022. From the programming team specific to the educational team, the team was able to rehold their winter events for the first time since 2019, including All Aboard, which Kevin mentioned previously, a train-themed children's holiday event at Pump House, and Winter Light, a winter-themed children's event at McLaughlin. Picture to the right is a Trains and Tots event on the top, and the lower picture is the team working at All Aboard. The team was also able to add a new program of heritage bike tours this year, as well as the return of programming workshops at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. Next slide, please. The curatorial team installed their in-house curated exhibit, On the Move: 400 Years of Transportation in Kingston, as pictured in the slide. The exhibition provided the Heritage Services programming team with the opportunity to collaborate with departments within the city, as well as community groups and museums within the area to bring together this exhibit. Next slide, please. The Civic Collection team brought in 10 new objects to the primary and secondary collections, as well as maintaining and cleaning a selection of public art pieces and monuments in the City of Kingston's public art collection. Pictures to the right are two of the 2022 acquisitions. At the top is a fragment of wallpaper that was found inside the walls during the fire suppression upgrade renovations at City Hall. The fragments of wallpaper are pieces that were in what was then the caretaker's house and in what is now legal services offices. The lower image is a collection of 1908 fire maps and surveys of Kingston, Portsmouth, and Berryfield. This piece is currently out with the Canadian Conservation Institute for conservation. As you can see, there's quite a bit of duct tape holding the book together and quite a bit of damage. So both of these objects we hope will help us in interpreting City Hall history and providing more curated exhibits. And I believe that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. So at this point, then I'm just going to ask if the committee has any questions about the report. This is a report for information purposes only, but again, you have 5 minutes to ask questions about the report. So anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? And thank you. The wallpaper was interesting. I was wondering about the pattern on it being from City Hall. Any questions? Oh, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, being new to the committee, I'm not sure how often things are deaccessioned from the Civic Collection. I know you can kind of just give a ballpark, but I was just curious.
Melanie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the time that the city has had their collection, to understand it was only once, and there was a large collection of objects. It was mainly reproductions and pieces of furniture that were highly deteriorated. And we did work to rehome them or take them over to a conservation lab. There will be some more coming, though, of objects that we're kind of constantly finding. The collection is quite vast.
Okay. Thank you, Melanie. Laura, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask? No? Okay. And Jeffrey, go ahead. Oh, unmute again.
Yeah, just I don't know whether it's under Melanie's bailiwick, but she produced these numbers on attendance at the various museums throughout the year. Very interesting. I wonder, though, if there's any market surveys on what people who attend these museums think of the museum. to guide us in our future plans. So are there any surveys being undertaken over the years on the different the attendees and their reactions to the exhibitions?
Kevin or Melanie?
I can take that one. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Jeffrey, actually, we do extensively talk to and hand out surveys, especially when we provide guided tours. We have about a 2-page long survey that we have our staff that are providing those tours fill out. So I do have another report that we have of all the input and comments from visitors to the museums that we do share internally within our department to discuss improvements and potential.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, do you have any other questions before I go to Sherry?
No, not at all. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Sherry, go ahead.
I know, having been a city hall tour guide, that people can sign a book and make comments about their tour, and I found that was really fascinating and very helpful as well.
Great comment. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone who has not had one yet? Yes, I see you. There's your hand up there in the corner. Comes up really small on my screen. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. I'll have to stop using the hand. I can see that.
I just have to get used to I have 2 screens going. I just have to get used to it, or just wave at me.
Sorry, I'm just pulling you. Like, sorry, I shouldn't do that. No, a couple of things. First of all, I just want to commend Melanie and Kevin and all of your staff on this Civic Collections online database that the city has instituted. And obviously you've still got a long way to go. I know, because I mean, it's labor intensive work and it takes a lot of time, but I certainly hope that the budget office of the city has put some more money towards either hiring some summer students or someone who's very familiar with input into databases to get more and more information up there. I mean, especially, and here I am, put my archives hat on again from the archival side. And on that note, I haven't done a lot of searching on the city's database, city site as a whole, but as I know Melanie is aware, probably more than anybody else at City Hall, I mean, Queen's University Archives has still, I don't know, because I don't know what you got on site now up at Martin Storage anymore, but there's over 500 linear feet of the historical record at Queen's, and a lot of it has been inventoried and is accessible online through the Queen's Archives database, but there doesn't seem to be a link anywhere on the city's website to allow people to access the Queen's Queen's site and the Queen's database. And I'm just wondering if somebody, I mean, you've got the expertise down there for sure. So if somebody couldn't just, it's not going to take a lot. And I mean, you may have to get in touch with the university archivist. I'm sure he won't have any trouble with that, but just to provide that link so that people don't necessarily have to go searching through a lot of blah, 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 to actually get to the holdings, the archival holdings, the city's archival holdings, which, as you know, are actually yours. They're not the university's at all. The university just holds them. And as I say, therefore, just, provide that link to the archive, just make things a lot easier, I think, for you. So I'll get off my box and shut up for a while.
No, those were welcome comments and questions, Paul. So Melanie or Kevin, would you like to provide some comment on that?
Yeah, I can take that one again. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a great comment, Paul, and I'll definitely look into that. I was under the impression that there was a link somewhere, but I know that some cleanup of the website is ongoing. So I will look and make sure that there is a link, because that's a great idea.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Melanie. That's appreciated. So anyone who has not yet asked a question, do you have any questions about this? Okay, I don't see any. I'm just going to ask a very quick question about attendance. I know that we're still, just coming into the end of April here, but any idea on how attendance is panning out so far this year with museums at City Hall? And I'm not going to hold you to the numbers. I'm just wondering if we are seeing a resurgence.
I will say, Madam Chair, I'll take that. I think that people are starting to come back slowly. We don't have our tour guides on site yet, so I can't give you hard numbers because we don't have anyone collecting that data just yet. But I think Kevin can speak to this too. I have seen people starting to slowly come back, and the numbers are nowhere near what they were before. But I think that this year we will see a bit more.
Okay, great. That sounds like good news, and we'll keep moving ahead. All right, well, seeing no more questions, so we have no motions for this meeting, no notices of motions, no other business, no correspondence, Ian, I'm assuming. Okay, so that takes us to the date of our next meeting, which is July 20th at 1 p.m. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again, and thank you for joining this committee now that we're constituting it fresh. It's a great start. So I'm just going to now ask for a motion to adjourn. Okay, Paul and Laura, and all in favor? Awesome. So we will see you all in July. In the meantime, hopefully you'll all get out and enjoy the weather. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.